Welcome back to the ZERT Coffee and Chaos Podcast, a show where we talk about anything and everything relating to what it means to be a survivalist and a prepared individual in today's society. I'm your host, Chris Bartigone, ZP002. Back with me on the show today, my co-host for the day, Paul Taylor, Mr. X. Welcome back, my friend.
Thanks.
Welcome back.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Always good to be here. Always good to hang out with you through a computer screen.
I know, it's not the same, but it's it is technology, and I love that we're able to do it. And I you and I have had a couple of chats over the last week, and I do love having you on the show. I love your perspective on things. We've had a regular couple of hosts, right? I mean, between you and Jamie, and it's two different shows when you guys are on, and I love the fact that it is two different shows. And then I've had random people on the show, and it's always wild to get them involved, because most of those shows are stories about their life, their journey, what they're doing. If it happens to be Tess, who works for Viz site, she's also a competitive shooter. Like, just hearing their kind of take on what we're talking about, what that topic is. And then we kind of get into the survivalism and preparedness side of it to hear where they're at with it. Learning that Tess is a prepper or a survivalist. And so is Chris Serino, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. But we are well over episode 100 now. And I'm glad that you've been a part of it. So.
And probably lots of things has changed since that first episode. Like a lot of things have changed.
It's so funny, because and Jamie asked that question. He was like, "What's the faux pas, if you will, on going back and redoing some old episodes or revisiting some of those episodes?" And I told him, I said, I think that would be awesome, because going back to the first, I don't even know how many, but I'd have to go back and look. The first few episodes were done with Dan, who was working for me at the time. We were doing it in the HQ, in the conference room, setting up, and we were face to face doing this. So it was really awesome. And I didn't realize the level of preparedness that Dan had and how it started, which is funny that we're talking about this, because it kind of goes into the topic that we're going to address today. Before
we get into that, first of all, I don't know what faux pas. What did you say? What was that?
Oh, it's kind of like, okay. I mean, it just means,
I don't know what that means, and I don't care.
What's the acceptable form of going back and redoing an older episode?
That's funny that you should say that, because as soon as you said that me and Jamie are different, the first thing that comes to mind is and I'm not describing Jamie in any way. I just know about me. And when you're in Ranger Battalion, they always said there's two different Rangers. There's smart Rangers and there's strong Rangers. Well, I was classified as a strong Ranger, maybe not too much between the ears. So I'm guessing if we're two different people, then Jamie's probably the intellectual side, the faux pas, or whatever you just said, the side. And I'm I can talk about lifting heavy stuff and putting heavy stuff down and all.
No. You both are unique in your co-host abilities. And it's a different show with each of you. Obviously, when we talk about what we're the topic of the show, there are certain things that Jamie goes and does a deep dive with and does a lot of research on and provides, facts. And there's shows obviously that we've done that I've done the same. There's shows where I've done outlines of what the show is like. And, it's kind of like, okay, talking point, and I want to engage these talking points and, a back and forth discussion. And I don't think I've ever sent anything over to you, but there has been shows that you've been on where you've had notes that you refer to on specific topics. I know that the navigation one was one of them, but
Yeah, usually those notes are like one word reference just to remind me to talk.
Right. Well, listen,
It's like,
that's
hey,
great.
Paul. Hey, Paul, we're going to do a show. Okay. Well, how are we going to do it? Just wing it. Roger that. That's what I do best, I guess.
Okay. Well,
We're
hey,
going to wing it.
that's one thing. Before we get into the actual show, folks, I always start the show. I always thank you guys for being here. So thank you for joining us today on this show. And thank you for your support up until this show and your continued support going forward. As you are all aware, we publish our shows every Thursday on Spotify and Apple, and it goes out through the Firearms Radio Network. And then the video portion of the show goes out on the YouTube channel, not the original YouTube channel, but the new YouTube channel, which is the ZERT Coffee and Chaos channel, and that's where we put all of the podcasts. We did try and separate that. So if you have not followed that one, please head over and like that channel, subscribe to it, maybe hit the bell so you get notified when we drop these new videos, and then just do all that, like and subscribe and commenting on the videos. It helps all of the YouTube world get our stuff out there. We've had some good traction on it's so wild, dude. Like, the Stolen Valor podcast has been one of our most popular podcasts to date. I mean, it was viewed over 550 times. And coincidentally, out of all of the podcasts that have gone up on the new channel, that one and the drone one have seen that kind of numbers. And if I go back and I look at some of the shorts, because what we do is we take the full episode and we cut it down into shorts, a minute 50. And the one that we did about the EDC routine of a Green Beret has gotten quite a few views as well. And that was the one where we were talking about, how you prepare your pistol and you kind of do that whole routine. So it's wild. The YouTube world is a wild place. So here we are.
And I hate to say it, and I know my opinion doesn't matter as much as the viewer's opinion, but I can honestly tell you that the favorite shows that I've done are the ones with all three of us, because we all three bring a different perspective and a different background. If you had two Rangers on here, I mean, it basically just be a mirror image of each other. So I think it's pretty cool to, and it's not like we're all three debating each other, but we all three bring a different perspective, based on our background and the stuff that we've been through. And I just think, and we might talk about that a little bit in this, next hour, but it's cool when you're around people in a community. Everybody brings a different, whether it's knowledge or experience or so on. That's everybody should be bringing something to the table.
Yeah, it's a different perspective on whatever that topic of conversation is, right? Like that, going back to that Stolen Valor, you were looking at it from the lens of an SF guy, somebody who knew the guy, and that's your world. Jamie was, but you're a civilian now, but that's where you spent a good portion of your time. Jamie's still active duty, and he looks at it from his lens, and then I look at it from a civilian lens, but I knew the guy, or I know the guy, and I've had a meal with the guy and tried to work with the guy, and I'm looking at it from that lens. So I do enjoy when all three of us are on, and I wish we could do that more, but obviously we have to be very cognizant of everybody's schedule. This is all volunteer time, and it's fun, even though I spend hours on the phone with you a week and I spend hours on the phone with Jamie a week. We should save those conversations, or just start hitting record at that point and then have to fill in the video portion afterwards. But today's topic is this was something, and Jamie and I went back and forth, and there was a list of things that we have coming up that we want to talk about. And I like that I can take two different points of view on this, yours and his, and attack these different subjects. And I felt like today's was something that I wanted to have you on, because you have obviously been with ZERT a long time. You've seen it, under its original and its new form. and I know where you sit when it comes to some of these. And when we first had this conversation, you were like, God, that's the worst one. I don't want to do it, because you can talk this stuff all the time. And, you know, one of the things with ZERT as a community, as a brand, as a lifestyle, if you will, being a survivalist and a preparedness mindset and lifestyle and brand, is the ability to network with those like-minded people. And ZERT started very much as a firearm-centric, firearm-heavy organization. It was all about firearms training. And then it evolved over time, but it still has its roots deeply embedded into firearms. I am no different when it comes to firearms and my love for them and wanting to, you know, learn as much as I can when it comes to that. But what ZERT is more than that, right? And so today's topic is, don't make networking weird or all about guns and preparedness. You have to build relationships and have normal conversations with people and understand how you can approach the subject without immediately sending them off into left field, right? And I think there is definitely a challenge in that with a lot of people involved in ZERT, not involved in ZERT. I know that I have to address it different ways. I'm sure you do too.
Oh,
Or
I can
not.
talk now. Is that my cue?
Or not.
Yes. No.
Great, Paul.
Oh,
So
I've got a
glad.
lot to say, and I think you might
Okay.
not agree with everything. But that's the
Well,
cool thing about this show is,
yeah.
you know, we agree to disagree. No, I
Sure.
do completely agree with that. I agree with that statement 100%. But at the same time, I think it's, man, I'm not sure how to put this. You know, I guess I'll just wing it.
Do it. Wing it.
Depending on where you're at, you got to kind of know your target audience.
Sure.
You know, when in
100%.
Rome, you know,
Yep.
you got to, you know, when in Afghanistan, you got to speak as close to Arabic as possible. So
Right.
you can't, I don't want to use the term burning bridges, but that is a term that a lot of people use a lot of times. And it's one of those things where, you know, and my problem, you know, and just going into me, man, I would probably, I don't want to say that firearms consumes the majority of my life and downtime, and because I still consider it a hobby. Now I can tell
Right.
you in the military, you know, most of the training that we did was firearms training.
Of course.
But alongside of that, it didn't mean that we ignored everything else. And the possibility of, you know, it wasn't just like when you're in the team room, you just dry fired all the time. Like you did medical training and you did other stuff that was just important, which means when you look at that aspect, you're not only doing things that are important, you're viewing occupations, jobs, skills that are important.
Right.
And we can't forget about that other stuff.
No,
You know,
not at
and I
all.
think that's kind of like what I get out of this. It's like, yeah, man, two things that I love doing is riding motorcycles and shooting guns. It doesn't mean that half of my time I'm devoted to 50% of my time I'm devoting to riding motorcycles and the other 50% is shooting guns. There's family, there's priorities, there's all this other stuff. So we can't ignore this stuff or,
Right.
you know, I mean, it's great
Right.
that I have a range, but I got to tell you, like I notice, like as much as I talk about shooting and a range in my backyard and I shoot quite a bit and I'm dry firing, some of those students look at me like I'm weird, like what, because of my obsession with firearms. Because
Well,
honestly, firearms have kept me alive. It's
yeah.
it's a thing where I use it to help vent and recover and all that stuff, but everybody isn't like me. So we got to
Listen,
think about that.
right. 100%. And I'm going to tell you a little bit, tell you a story here. I remember this was December 2018, and I was with a group of my high school friends. So friends that I grew up with, and we were down in Florida for another friend's wedding. We were actually down in the Keys. And I remember being at dinner with, and I was at dinner with, his name is Mike Ioli. I was with my friend Amy Shepherdson and Amy Frennis, and it was myself. And we were all staying in a townhouse together before the wedding. And I remember having conversation at dinner, and Mike Ioli, who was one of my closest friends growing up, and he spent time out in Colorado. He was very much an outdoorsman, right? But not a big gun person. I just remember the subject coming up at dinner that night about, what's with all the guns and stuff on Instagram? Like, why is that all you're posting? And it was, I had the conversation, and I told him, I was like, well, I mean, it's the line of work. It's my passion. It's my hobby. But that comment resonated with me. And, I stopped posting so much about it. Now, since then, I've obviously stopped posting a lot on social media, and it just became kind of, I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into a certain type of demographic on social media. I didn't want to go that route, but anybody that knows me understands kind of where I'm at. So I know, like, even in October last year, it was his 50th birthday party, and we were all together at a party, and somehow the topic of ZERT came up. But I knew that I couldn't have that conversation about firearms and firearms training with this group. But in order to gain a little group of interest, I know that they're all parents, and I know that they drive, right? So one, they live in the city and they drive, they've got a commute. And I said, okay, well, do you have a medical kit in your car? Like, do you have an IFAK or a go bag that's filled with medical kits that could have stuff like, chest seal or tourniquet or bandages or Band-Aids or anything like that? And that was what clicked. Like, that was what clicked for Mike's wife. Like, hold on, this is interesting. And, then she called him over. But like I said, I knew he was an outdoorsman. And where I'm going with that is kind of like you said before, in just a different way. Like, you have to read the room and understand what's going to kind of break that barrier of I'm not interested into, hold on, this makes sense, right? I know that I can't talk to them about guns, but I know that if I'm sitting in a room with Ivan and Kurt and you and, the group from Pennsylvania, I know that we can have a conversation about firearms and what firearm you're carrying, and, what kind of ammo and how you're carrying, and, when was the last time you went and did dry firing? But does that mean that that makes you 100% prepared? No, not at all. I think that's the other thing that we need to think about is just because you have a firearm doesn't make you A, prepared, and B, invincible.
You better watch your mouth right now.
You better watch your mouth. But, where I'm going with that is I know that when I have to explain ZERT to somebody, I have to ask questions before I do. I'm going to call them out. And so if you're listening to this, Ted, you're getting called out. But I'll never forget the first time Ted tried to do a gun show in Arkansas to get more ZERT members. And I remember him going to the organizer of the event, and he immediately threw out zombies to this guy. And the guy was like, nah, I'm good. I'm all set. And I was, I remember having to try and talk to the guy and see about getting him to come back, right? It's one of the reasons why we stopped using ZERT as an acronym and throwing zombies out there, because some people will get it and they'll understand it. But the majority of people, you've got to reel them back in once you cast that zombie word out there, and you're like, oh, hold on, let me reel them back to the table here.
Yeah, I agree with you with that, but I'm also going to be the devil's advocate again.
Sure.
And I had a conversation the other day with somebody, and it was kind of ties in with this. And sometimes when you have a conversation for a reason with somebody, they're just looking for a reason not to be involved. you know,
True. Very true.
and it's just okay, that gives them permission. Well, I'm not into zombies. Well, man, it doesn't have anything to do with zombies, you know, and
Right.
I think, you know, and I'm pro ZERT back in the day. I'm pro ZERT now.
Right.
And the cool thing is, you know, going out to Oklahoma and seeing and what Jack does, dude, man, he what he does is perfect for Oklahoma. And how can I say that? Because of how successful he is out there
Right.
and all the different products he's bringing to the table, not just the firearms. And not, I mean, dude, he's freaking, just like you just said, it's more than the firearms. It's more than the metaphor. And he's got, when you go to his little clubhouse, the man,
Right.
there's zombie stuff all around. He
Of
doesn't care.
course. No.
It's fun. It's
Yeah.
fun. And back in the day, you know, whenever I'd have conversations with Aaron and he'd talk about this and this and that, he's like, dude, you can't, like, and even some of you guys don't know this, some of you guys don't. When I first moved to Las Vegas, I got a job at basically I was a Green Beret again. I was acting, right. I was being myself. I was acting like myself. And
Okay.
but it was an event where we were bringing civilians in and like it was a scenario just so they could live a day in the life of somebody that has kind of sort of been there, done that. And
Okay.
We needed bad guys.
Yep.
You can't use somebody in another country. You can't use Chinese or Japanese, or because it's going to offend people. You can't use Germans, you know.
Right.
So we had two options. We could use clowns because a lot of people hated clowns, you know, scary clowns, or zombies. Everybody hates zombies. So it just, okay, zombie masks were cheaper than clown masks. They were easy to get to. In the movies, there was a lot more zombie movies at the time. And
True.
It was fun. It was
Yes.
just fun. So I can see the fun side of, i.e. the t-shirt, shoot zombies in the face, and
yeah, of course,
you know, you want to defend your house against zombies, put a bunch of treadmills around it. Like it's fun, you know, and I get
Right.
that. And I think Jack pitches that, but then there is another side, and I do
Right.
agree with you. And it's the, I don't want to say the professional side, but there's a gray man aspect to it,
Of
you
course.
know,
Right.
not just you know, right. And I love the guys that put the zombie stickers and the stuff all over the car, and I respect that and that dedication. But I also respect the gray man side of it, that you don't put all that stuff in your vehicle, and you kind of got to find that happy medium between both of them.
Right.
And, because we're trying to, dude, we're trying to help everybody.
Right. Yeah, that's the whole point. Like, I don't want just people that are so devoted and headstrong about firearms to be part of this community, because like I said, that doesn't solve all of the problems all of the time, you know. In reference to Jamie and earlier the conversation that you and I had, like, Jamie put up a post about him using a sewing machine to sew something, and then you and I spoke about it earlier today. And I mean, you know, I remember growing up in middle school having to take home economics, and they taught me how to cook things and they taught me how to sew things. And I don't know if they still do in that class today. I mean, I'm so far removed from that, but it's a skill that I've definitely lost. Can I thread a needle and can I sew something by hand? Yes. Do I know how to operate a sewing machine right now? No, not at all. I mean, I you know, probably a quick YouTube tutorial and I could go back and sew something. But you told me today earlier that you've got a sewing machine and you've made repairs on stuff that, you know, needed to be repaired. And I think that's, even though it's a very small skill set, or maybe it's a very scarce skill set, like one that you would not need to use maybe very often, I do know that I could sew something right now. I was telling you about a hole in my pocket of a pair of pants that I have, and I'm like, okay, well, you know, I can duct tape it or I can sew it. But it's a skill set that you should have.
Exactly. And and you just talked about it. One of the benefits of being single almost my entire life is the fact that I know how to sew. And I'm not saying that one way or another, but there's a lot of stuff that I've kind of like said I needed to know this because maybe I'm the only option. And instead of going to a tailor or having something and they charge me $5, I'm like, well, why don't I know how to? And I did the same sewing class in middle school, but I was I made my first IDPA vest, my concealment vest. I made it because I didn't like any of
Really
the vest out there. So I
interesting.
literally took a military BDU top, cut it up, sewed it up, and made it into a vest and had people go, "Oh, where'd you get that?" And this and that. It's like, man, I can make these things,
Look at
but
that. I
I
like
don't
it.
want to because I'm not a sewer.
Right, right.
I'm a
But but there you go. Like that is a skill set that is probably going to be needed in, or I'm sorry, it is a skill set that should be included in your toolbox, if you will. Like if you think of all of your skills as a tool, right? And you've got a big giant snap-on toolbox and you can start opening these drawers and saying, okay, what skills can I pull out if needed, right? Like being able to sew is one of them. Being able to work on your vehicle is another one. And all of these are things that you can talk about that don't make it weird when you're talking about preparedness and what ZERT is at its core, right? You don't need to talk about cleaning guns or shooting guns.
I agree with you, but I disagree at the same time. And this is what I disagree with. And
Okay.
I think you bring a good point up, but I think that we could look at the flip side of that. I I cannot be the subject matter expert when it comes to everything. And
I agree.
if I was in a community where I was the most knowledgeable person about everything in that community, I need to kind of probably expand my community a little bit and kind of
Sure.
make it bigger. So
Right.
the whole aspect of me knowing everything, that's impossible. What I need to make sure that I do have is the fact that my community is large enough to cover down on the things that I don't know. And the cool thing about being a Green Beret and being on an ODA is, man, I knew medical stuff, but I was not a medic. I know how to talk on a radio, but I wasn't the comms guy. Every aspect, like every guy on an ODA, a special forces ODA is important and they all have a job. And that's we always called, a special forces ODA, it's not it's a stew. It's a stew of all these vegetables and all these different things that when you mix it together, it doesn't combine everything. You still want you want the vegetables and the meat and all these separate parts, but that's what it makes it what it is. Man, if I don't know something, or if I don't, I might know medical stuff, but if something happens and I need to look within my community, I need to have somebody in that community that knows a lot more than I know about a certain subject.
Oh, I
So,
agree.
and I'm not saying, yes, absolutely know how to sew, but man, a it would be great to have the dude that owns Tactical Tailor to be part of your niche.
Right.
Like you've developed relationships with
Right.
people in ZERT that can
Right.
sew you up stuff. So you
Right.
don't have to sit there behind a sewing machine and do this
Right.
stuff.
But I guess,
That's like
right.
bringing that community together.
But, and where I was going with
I know
that,
where you were going. I was just adding that
no, no,
second
no.
piece.
And I appreciate that. And what I'm saying, and I just want to kind of clarify that, just because you have that toolbox, let's go back to that toolbox metaphor. And, you can have a drawer full of tools. It doesn't mean they're the best tools. They're the most polished tools, but they are a drawer of tools. Somebody else can have better tools or more refined tools. And I think that's kind of a mesh of where you were going and where my point was. Like, I'm not saying that you've got to have that toolbox full of the most perfect polished tools. It helps to have as many drawers filled with as many tools as you can. You can have basic knowledge. I am not the rope expert. Can I tie 2 or 3 knots? Yes. How many knots are there? Way more than that. How many more should you know? I mean, maybe 10 knots total. If you start to Google how many knots should you know in, a camping situation or a boating, it may tell you 10. I've got 3 of them, 2 of them,
Yeah.
3 of them,
How many knots do you need to know if you go out and sail? Probably
Right.
completely. I mean, it's
Right.
probably 100 knots.
Right. I know how to make a fire with a ferro rod and a knife or whatever and some kind of tinder situation, but do I know how to use a flint and that process? Do I know how to use a bow and a string to make it? No. So if somebody can come in and say, okay, listen, that's great that you can use a ferro rod, but you lost it or whatever, am I cold that night? You know what I mean? So
well, and I think that's the cool thing about ZERT, because if you look across all the ZERT Facebook pages, and you look at these people that are doing meet and greets and they're active, when you start bringing these people with different backgrounds into the community and start to get to know them and develop those relationships, and you can go to that person and realize that maybe that guy's a doctor, maybe that person is a professional seamstress. Is that the right word?
Yeah,
or maybe they bring something to the table. Ham radios is a big one, but maybe they bring something to the table. So every one of those meet and greets, when you talk about something, it's not just about firearms. Now you're giving a sewing class, and all of a sudden, Chris is like, oh, wow, you guys are doing a meet and greet in North Carolina about a sewing class. I would like to go to that, because that's something that is awesome. And now I'm adding, it's not teaching me how to be a professional sewer, but it's teaching me how to get by, depending on how much effort I want to apply to that. And it might be something that I gain interest in, research, get better at, but it got my foot in the door. It's like that tiny little tool in the toolbox, and it's up to me on whether or not I want to exchange it for a bigger one, a better one, or just stay buying all my tools at Temu, or start like upgrading those tools and making them better tools.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying if you walk into a party, a gathering with your friends, and there's 3 people out there with your Molon Labe and your Sig Sauer, and this truck is protected by Glock, and all of your I'm the Reaper with a guy holding an AR sticker. I'm sure you're safe to talk firearms in that group as a preparedness type situation.
What kind of party are you going to when those people are showing up? I'm not saying those people like in a bad thing.
Likely one in Pennsylvania.
That might be right.
Central PA. I mean, anywhere where freedom rings, and I love it. But going to a gathering and sitting there and being able to have a conversation about, hey, what's your plan if the cell phone network goes down? How are you going to communicate with the people that are outside of this room to let them know you're safe? Let's just start there. Not what you're going to do after, not what happens after that part of your plan is engaged and you don't even realize it, because that should be the part of everybody's survival plan that immediately triggers it. If the cell phone towers go down and you can't go check your Twitter or your Insta Facebooks, I know that the world is going to crumble.
Yeah, I agree with you. I talked to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and I brought up something. It's like, why you bringing up a solution for a problem that hasn't happened yet? And I looked, I was like, were you even in the military? Like, how is that even close to the right answer? Like, I don't have to wait for a fire to happen before I decide, okay, maybe I should have had a fire extinguisher.
Exactly.
That's the whole point of like being ready. Like, like I just, it's like I don't think, as everybody considers the word prepper a bad word, but we all prep in one way or another. And when you told me about this subject, I kind of thought about it a little bit and what we were going to talk about while we were trying to stay on topic. And sitting there thinking, it's like, man, I've got all this pretty cool experience in the military. And when, and you know, in my, it's a claim to fame. It's also a thing that dwells on me, because like, man, if I would have just stayed at one place, I could have probably been pretty successful. But I saw so many different sides of the military, and I was in conventional military, I was in special operations, difference between the Marine Corps, the Army. The difference between being in a Marine Corps rifle platoon and a 2-man scout sniper platoon, and then the difference between being a ranger that was direct action, focus was on, you know, for a 24-hour period, we could sustain an offensive operations. But any bit longer than that, man, you were like, you needed support, and that support had to come from somewhere. Whereas a Green Beret, we could support ourselves. For now, in saying that, you always need support in the military.
Right.
But I kind of look at like where I'm at now, and the amount of, even with all the guns I know and all the training I have, if something happens, I can't do it by myself. Whatever it is that I'm going to do, whether it's a flood, a fire, you know, whatever, you know, so, you know, it's like, well, if the cell phone communication went down and I couldn't communicate, well, who am I communicating with? What's my intent? Like, you gotta, like, who am I calling?
Right.
And
Yeah,
that's how
exactly.
you start developing that plan. And you can honestly have a no comms plan with somebody. If something happened, just know, hey, this is what I'm probably going to do. Be prepared. You know,
Right.
two people that if something happens and they're like, oh, they don't have a plan, and they're like, well, I'm going to go to their house. Well, what if you're going to their house while they're
And
coming to your house? You're just
exactly.
going to continually, you
Right.
know, so that's part of the stuff that you need to think about. And that's just on the communication side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just one little tiny thing. But
Right.
it's part of having that plan.
Yeah, of course, of course. And you know, these are all things that we've just talked about. And sure, we've sprinkled in some firearm chat in between there, but these are all things that you can have these conversations with people without putting them back on their heels, right? I guess the first thing that I would ask you, and I mean you out there listening, how do you approach the subject of a survival plan or being prepared in a situation that could potentially happen? And it does not have to be some of the stuff that is outlandish or outrageous, right? You don't need to go, okay, what if Russian paratroopers start parachuting into your ground? Are you going to, you know, Wolverines this and head into there? Like, it could be as simple as, hey, you know, what happens if you're like, what happens if we're on the road and you know, we get hit with one of these winter storms, like we're not, you know, and we get stuck on the highway? Do you have any kind of, do you have a blanket in your car? Do you have water in your car? Do you have some sort of rations for, you know, in your vehicle, medical equipment? Like, do you have anything prepared for that? I mean, you know, and that's how you approach this topic. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I hate to say that I agree with you again, you know,
this is
because
great.
we're
What are we
supposed
like?
to be debating.
We're like 3 for 5 here.
But I think a lot of the stuff that can resonate with another individual is like stuff that not only that's going on with them at the moment, but stuff that's going on. And I'm not talking about whether somebody watches Fox News or CNN or
Right.
what they feel about like opinions of like, you know, well, that's just you know, that's all made up. You know, a couple of months ago we did the podcast where, you know, I knew somebody that lost a family member. And part of that preparedness is like making sure all your stuff is in order,
Right.
you know, and that's that I don't want to say that first step, but sometimes that's a reality check when somebody's going through that at the moment. And then it's like a whole shoot. I'm not even ready for that. So, you know, you never want to wait for a flood to happen, but even the
Right.
people in North Carolina that knew the people down there. And I know a lot of people in North Carolina that was affected by this because I lived down there for the majority of my military career.
Right.
I mean, you don't want to wait to try to hash out a pace plan for after a flood. Imagine the
No.
people in California, like there's that one house Like there was a transition from houses being burned down to
Right.
not a house being burnt down. Imagine
Yep.
being that house that didn't burn down. And
Yeah.
you like, holy, do you think that they don't have a plan now?
Well,
I
right.
mean,
But here's what,
tornadoes that go through a strip and yours is the only house. I
yeah,
guarantee you they have learned their lessons learned out there in the Midwest to have their bunkers and, stuff in place.
yeah, but here's what really boggles my mind over that, right? Like, how many times has California experienced wildfires, right? Like, how would people not be prepared? And I guess, if you look at Florida and hurricanes, right? When hurricane season happens down in Florida, these people are so prepared that they go out and have hurricane parties. Like they go to the liquor store and buy as much alcohol as they possibly can because they know that the next couple of days, if it's bad, is going to be just getting through it, waiting until everything kind of opens back up, if you will. So, does that mean that they're prepared? I mean, I think to an extent it does, right? They're not freaking out. They're not running out to get lumber to cover their windows. They know the hurricane is coming. They put up the hurricane shutters. They go out. They maybe they already have gas, or maybe they just don't plan on using any because they're going to stay in and drink.
Well, I think part of being prepared is being mentally prepared, not just physically prepared. And
I agree.
They're not out buying plywood because they've already got a stack of plywood behind the shed.
Right.
Because they know the lines at Lowe's and Home Depot and the prices are everybody price gouges. Like, you know what? I got the plywood. They're there, and they basically go down that checklist. That's done. That's done. That's done. What else is there?
Right.
Grab the booze and let's have a hurricane party.
So, do you think it would be very easy to have a conversation with somebody in Florida about the importance of being prepared in other aspects, right? So, sure, they're prepared for a hurricane. What else are they prepared? Are they prepared for a medical emergency? Are they prepared for a communication blackout? Are they prepared for civil unrest? I mean, do you think it's easy to have a conversation with those folks?
I mean, I guess it depends on who you're kind of having a conversation with, what their background is. The cool thing about Florida is, if you ever spent time, there's a lot of snowbirds from a lot of different areas from around the country that moved to Florida. And that's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions that come from a lot of different places and they have a lot of different backgrounds. You just don't have one group of people that all believe the same thing, which is, that's how you kind of want to approach that, those people like-minded, that's why it's, I'm not gonna grab Jamie and have Jamie go to a place in Oklahoma to talk to a bunch of people. I'm going to have Jack do that because Jack knows those people. It's kind of like, you got to fit those people into those, it's like you don't have a guy in a suit and tie, that looks like a multi-billionaire that's, got a silver spoon stuck up his rear end. You don't take that guy to a ranch in Texas and everybody's got a cowboy hat, and crap on their boots. It's a different mindset. It's a different, you kind of got to fit in with your environment. It's funny. I'm going to tell you guys a little story real quick and used to crack me up because we used to all get a kick out of it. Okay. Mr. Blue, I love Mr. Blue to death.
No,
but man, Mr. Blue used to show up at some of the classes in some of these areas and like the middle of Pennsylvania, a bunch of rednecks in certain areas. And he dressed really well. Like he looked like he lived in Las Vegas and he'd have a nice button up polo, little ZERT. And he used to always have his tactical shirt tucked into he would wear golf pants. That was his shooting pants, golf pants. And they look good. And the one day at time we were teaching a class and he shows up with these golf pants. Of course, he's a SEAL. So he's got like gel in his hair and he shows up. This guy's a Navy SEAL and he looked good. He shows up with an umbrella and everybody's just shaking. Some of the guys listening to this might even have been at that class. And you're like, dude, said, I don't want to get my notes wet. And I'm like, okay, brother, you do you. But it was just, and I'm not saying know your target audience there. But
listen, I want to pause you.
A good time.
Yeah, I want to pause right there. If anybody that's listening to this show or watching this episode on YouTube was at that class and remembers Mr. Blue, I want you to do me a favor and sound off in the comments below, whether it's on the audio version or the video version. I want to know who was there, and I want to know in the comments what you
I was
thought.
there. I was right. I was AIing
Well,
for him. I was right there.
okay.
I saw it. I was like, "You got to be kidding me, man! You're
Other than
I don't
Paul,
want
I
to get
want to
my
know
notes."
who, other than Paul, I want to know who was there, and I want to know what your thoughts were when you saw Mr. Blue with his umbrella. So that's your homework.
But in
ahead.
saying that, you know, and I respect that guy. You know, I give him all their, you know, it's dude. He spent time in the pool, in the ocean. He's been wet. Like I got it. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, you know, after a while, you know, after spending the night on the ground so much, I really like a bed. You know, when
Yeah.
I go camping, dude, you know, I would rather, dude, I'm not saying I glamp that word.
No.
I'm never going to go
Right.
glamping. I
Well,
like to rough it, but I mean, it's like, dude, been
yeah.
there, done that. I want to be comfortable.
Yeah.
So I understand that side
Yeah.
too. So Fred, if you're hearing this, I'm not dissing you too bad. I completely understand, brother. Love you, miss you. Hope you're doing well.
Yes, for sure. Love me some Fred Ruiz. Um, to your glamping point, you know, obviously everyone that listens to this by now, I'm assuming that you understand and you know that I'm a big fan of camping, whether it's car camping on the weekends, extended weekends. I love to do it, and it's evolved from, you know, a sleeping pad and a sleeping bag on the ground to a cot now with a very comfortable sleeping pad and you know, pillows. um you know, could I go back and revert to as primitive as it was? Sure, I can, but I don't have to. And at 50 years old, I don't want to. Uh, will I? Is there a world where I would love to have a camper and go do that? Yeah, for sure. Quite frankly, you know, the camper idea is a great survival plan. You know, if you've got the ability, and it's funny we're talking about this because I was talking to a buddy of mine who I know he's a ZERT member down in Georgia, a friend of mine. I worked with him in the past, and we talked about what our survival plan was after watching the movie Homestead. And I've talked to a couple of buddies of mine. And the other buddy that I'm going to refer to, he lives out in Montana. And he's also, like, he said to me, he was like, you know, it's so weird to try and have conversations with people about this because they look at you like, you know, you're crazy. And I'm like, well, how are you approaching the subject is the first step, right? So back to the guy in Georgia, you know, I was like, well, what does your survival plan look like? Like, how much are you, you know, bringing? What are you bringing? Where are you going? And he was like, quite honestly, you know, I'm going to my hunting property, the hunting lease where my camper is parked with the food, with the water, with a cache of, you know, supplies. And so I just need to get there. And that's a good point, you know? I mean, but it was an easy conversation to have with somebody who is very like-minded. We can start that conversation. Him and I can start that conversation with, hey, listen, what does your meal plan look like? Like, how many buckets of ready-wise meals do you have? You know, it's easy. The other one is water, right? I don't think anybody listening to this is as prepared as they think they are if they have no water ready to drink, ready to go. Like, do you have something? Do you have some kind of go containers filled with water? Or maybe it's cases of water. You know what I mean? And that's a very easy conversation to have. Do you agree?
Yeah, and darn it, I agree with you again. We're gonna have to
Look at
stop
that.
this. Just, I the cool thing about camping is whether, and it doesn't matter why you're camping, but to me, like this guy that has this plan, like your buddy down in Georgia that has this plan to go to his cabin. Why do you think that's going to be successful?
Um, why do I think it's going to be successful for him
Yeah,
or in general?
no, for him.
I think it's going to be successful for him because he's got a family and he's got young kids. So having a secondary home, quote unquote, home location to go to that is away from um, civilization, or the public arena, if you will. I think that works for him in his situation. If it becomes, where it's if it may be easily defendable, if he's got a extended supply of food and water and survival and medical equipment, then he's good. He's got young kids, they need medication, right?
Okay,
Like,
I agree with you, but
yeah.
How do you think he knows that it's going to be good? It's going to work
Oh,
that
I
he has
don't.
a family.
I mean, I couldn't answer that. I don't know if he
I can
actually
answer that.
know. Okay, sure. And then you answer it.
Well, that was a test just to get you thinking a
Okay.
little bit. I
Okay.
think he knows it's going to be successful because he's done it. He's gone out there and gone camping. He knows how long he's going to sustain. He is practiced this without saying to a bunch of people that he's practicing for an apocalypse or preparedness. He goes out, he's preparing his family, and every time he goes out there, he learns something else.
Yeah.
Something else he needs to take. I think people that go out camping and hiking, man, they're some of the best preppers out there, because there's so many people out there that say they watch the YouTube videos and they go, well, this is what my plan is, but they never initiate it. They never practice it. Whether you call it training, or practicing or going on a camping trip, those are the dudes that are figuring out if their backpack can hold the weight, if they've got enough water, if their water filtration system works, if whether or not they can hack the iodine tablets. They're figuring this stuff out, how much their food supply can last them, because they've gone out. I learned more as a civilian during my hike on the C&O Canal.
I was going to bring that up.
In those 10 days that I've ever learned about myself. I learned that, you know what? I could probably walk this distance when I felt like, man, I could never do that, just because I'm feeling sorry for myself. Man, I proved, and it wasn't just proving stuff physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and all that stuff. Like, these people, like, he knows that because he's done it. And his family probably doesn't even realize that he has a shit hits the fan plan, because they're just going out and having fun on a camping trip.
Yeah.
And that's how he portrays it to them, which I think is the whole point of this thing, man. You got to kind of get in tune. Hey, man, what's your, do you go camping?
Right.
Like,
yeah. I mean,
so people relate.
Obviously, that's a great way to start this conversation with somebody who you are unsure of. Like, hey, man, how do you feel about camping? Oh, no, I hate it. Okay.
Just two guys alone in the woods, me and you.
Well, we haven't done that yet.
I would start it like that, but
yeah, exactly. One tent, one sleeping bag. It's not even
warm out there.
Right. It's not even a double.
Chris, we're going to go camping in July, but we got to stay warm. So one tent.
Oh God, so scary.
Go ahead and delete that portion off this. I don't
even know if I can. We gotta somehow stop talking for 10 seconds so I can mark this and delete that entire last 10 seconds. For those of you listening, I'm so sorry. Anyway,
I apologize.
We got a little broke back on you there. Sorry about that, folks. We're back. But camping is another way to start that conversation. It proves that somebody can go out into the wilderness, the woods, even if it's one of these state parks that have, bathroom facilities. I mean, you still are dealing with minimal electricity, right? I mean, if you're in one of these sites where you can plug your RV in, sure, no problem. But I go out, I've got, a battery pack that has to keep my phone charged for 2 days. Granted, my truck is right there, and so you can plug stuff into there, but you're going out, you don't have a refrigerator, you've got a cooler with limited amount of ice, you got to plan the way that you cook your food, plan how you store your food. And it's a great way to gauge someone's survivability, I guess, if you will, if you do not have a hot shower and regulated temperature at night. I mean, I've been camping when it's 41 degrees out, and I'm a little bit lucky because I've got a 55-pound nuclear heater that likes to sleep up in the bed with me, and she's, you know, she's a. I mean, having a dog when it goes camping when you go camping is a great way. And I mean, there's often times when I just use a wool blanket, but
yeah, the conversation we had months ago, last year, way back in 2024, about the time you went camping, and you had just got a new stove, and you figured out you didn't even have the right parts for it.
Oh yeah.
Well, thank goodness you had a store that you could drive to. But
Yeah.
that opportunity gave you that gave you an opportunity to learn and get better. Like you're putting more tools in your toolbox. So yeah, it's great for you to figure that out then, before you go on another trip further back in the woods, further away from a store that now you got to tie into your pace plan even more because you don't have that opportunity. And
Right.
that's why we go out and do this stuff and test ourselves in all aspects, not just, making that packing list and never even realize I can't even put all this stuff either in my backpack
Right.
or on my motorcycle or in my truck,
Right.
or whatever, because every one of us is different. And we have a different plan, and and all
So
that stuff, different conditions.
right. So how do you handle the situation when you start to have the conversation and you're doing it the right way? Okay, you're not really just being like, what kind of gun do you carry? What are you going to bring in the apocalypse? Like, you start talking about it as a preparedness and a survivalist mindset and plan. What do you do when they're just not open to it, or they're open to it but they've got nothing, they've got no idea? Like, where do you start? Do you start with simple stuff, basic stuff? Do you start with medical? Obviously, if they don't own a firearm, that's problematic. I mean, have you ever run into a situation where you start to go down that road and they just like, they don't want to hear about it?
Yeah, of course. This is now. I don't always take this advice. Okay, I don't always do this. And because I'm hard headed and I'm set in my ways, and sometimes I don't care. Other times I do care. And I think the most important thing for all of us to understand is there's two ways of looking at this. And the one way is like, well, how do I start this? What do I say? I don't even think that's important. I think the biggest thing that we got to start doing anytime we have a conversation with somebody, we have to realize that conversation is two ways.
Yeah.
You're not just talking, you're also listening. So how about just sit back and listen and let them talk and figure out what their interests are and where they are. Maybe something happened in their life, or they're going through something and just listen. I mean, we're not, I know when a woman talks, she's not always wanting to hear me think I know what the answer is. She just wants somebody to listen to. But you can learn a lot about somebody by listening. And that might just give you just enough information that, if I listen to somebody, they might talk, hey, what do you do on weekends? Oh, I go camping. Boom, there's a door. We got something in common. Or, oh man, the other day I drove past a vehicle accident, or something happened to a neighbor, and the only thing I could do is dial 911. Well, have you I mean, I've taken medical classes. Would you like to take a medical class with me?
Right.
Or maybe they have a grandparent that's getting older. We all have something in common with each other.
Oh,
just instead of going into a conversation, it's like, this is everything that's about me. Maybe learn something about them. And then based on that, you can, I don't want to say weasel your way into it, but you might have something in common with that person. And next thing you know, you might have more things in common and more things that translate, and so on and so on.
Right. And I guess where I want to kind of add on to that, and the way that you just kind of brought it up, is with the whole listening and gathering information, it will tell you a lot, right? I mean, it will give you the best way to kind of approach it and not overwhelm somebody. And it could be conversations about, obviously everybody experienced COVID, and the question well, hey, how did you manage that? Did you have to run out and get toilet paper, or, or were you good? I mean, what was that like for you? It's
and
asking those questions.
and sometimes it's more important, because instead of just providing statements, me talking to you about, asking questions makes it more like, oh man, maybe they care, because they are asking me these questions, and what I think about stuff. So instead of just driving down something, it's like that used car salesman that's like, these are the cars, and you really need to be, how do you know I really need to be in that car when you know nothing about me?
Right.
It's like, how about listen to me a little bit? It's like, yeah, that's a nice fancy sports car, but I got 4 kids.
Right.
Like, you're not
Exactly.
even
That's
interested
right.
in knowing anything about me here, and maybe some stuff doesn't apply. Now,
Yeah.
in my opinion, I think everybody should have a gun and everybody should have a concealed carry permit,
I
but some
agree.
people just aren't comfortable with certain things, and I get that. And
Right.
but yeah, that's just taking it off on the gun tangent, which I probably
No,
shouldn't.
but I mean, like, you're not wrong about that at all. And, anybody that doesn't, when they're like, oh no, I haven't, or I haven't yet. Why? What are you waiting for? Don't wait, get it now. But I know that those are not going to be the people that I can engage in a conversation with about, what pistol I'm going to have in an apocalypse or a world crashing situation is going to be. That's not that person. That's not that conversation. I know how to do this and make it where I can engage people, with the exception of those people that do not want to hear it. And you're going to have those people out there. They just don't want to listen. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to accept that the world is going to change, and they're never not going to be able to update their Facebook status and check their TikToks and go on to Twitter and check their email. They never want to accept the fact that they can't go to the grocery store to get their food, or flick a light switch and they get lighting. And you're never going to be able to communicate with those people on a level where they're going to accept this mentality, this mindset, and how important it is to have a survival plan.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that is, and everything that you just said, I'm going to take back to the guns, even though it all applies. You have those people that they don't want to carry a gun and don't want anything to do with guns because they're anti-gun, and you're never going to change that opinion. And I got that. And they can be anti-gun because we're allowed to be, pro 2A,
Right.
anti 2A, whatever. But then you also have those people that don't have a gun just because maybe they haven't got the right training, or they're unfamiliar, or they're just, there are those two types of people, but
Right.
you're not going to know what type of person that is
No.
until you have a conversation with that person and you listen. And then once you listen, you're like, well, I know an NRA basic class over here. I know an instructor. There's an instructor in Southern. I'm not going to go ahead and do a pitch. There's an instructor in Southern Pennsylvania, does a pretty good job.
Yeah.
But you're not going to.
We're waiting for him to teach some ZERT classes.
That's right. But you're not going to be able to do that stuff unless you listen to somebody, hear somebody, and have an interaction where it's just not like you driving a point down their throat. And most of the time, we all know that's just going to turn somebody off anyways.
Right. So, and that's kind of how I want to leave this and wrap this episode up. Because if you're out here and you're listening to this podcast and you are a ZERT member and you are trying to recruit new people to join ZERT so they can experience some of the amazing benefits that this organization has, just with the discount codes to all of the companies that we are working with, not to mention the network of members that we have with the knowledge that comes along with it. If you're out there having those conversations, I implore you to listen before you talk. Ask a couple of questions and find out what their temperature is, if you will, on it. And you can do it in a couple of different ways, but just listen first. They will give you everything you need to know. For those of you that are listening that are not ZERT members and you have listened to this episode and now want to become a ZERT member, that's great. We've done what we wanted to do. Or you know, maybe you have a group of people out there that you talk about it in a different way, and we would love to hear some of that feedback. But either way, just start engaging in conversation and don't make it weird. Just understand the people that you're talking to, the audience, read the room, and learn what's important to them when it comes to being prepared. So with that, I leave you with, until next time, you guys stay safe. Paul?
Yeah, and add to that, you know, I wouldn't just focus on, you know, I most likely hang out with people that I have in common with. You know, I talk to Chris all the time. A lot of the people that I teach, we hang out, you know, and that's great. But you know, we always talk about ZERT's a group of like-minded individuals. Well, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't just be like-minded individuals. We have a responsibility to kind of broaden that community. I don't want to be around people just like me, because the only skill set we all have is the same skill set. You know, you got to hang out with people that have different backgrounds, that have different skill sets. I probably need to hang out with a professional seamstress, you know, just because that's how this started and that's how this is going to end. But man, just the fact that they have an occupation, a trade, a skill. It's not just a skill that I can say, hey, sew this for me. I can say, hey, man, can you teach me how to be better at sewing? And that's part of this, you know, until something happens, man, we should all be trying to stimulate our mind, our body, our spirit, you know, about the time that like if I start learning stuff, if I stop learning stuff, I might as well be dead. That's what life is all about, is, man, going out and bettering ourselves every day, one way or another, whether it's learning how to sew or listening to a podcast or learning how to shoot a gun better. Doesn't matter. Just go out there and be better.
Awesome. All right, guys. Until next time, ZP002 out.
XP0311 Delta out.
Later.
Yeah, I think for winging it.